Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the Lmsw exam, so stay tuned. So a little background about myself. I graduated from Florida Gulf Coast University in May of 2019 and I pursued my bachelor in social work, and then I went on to Howard University to obtain my master in social work, and I'm scheduled to graduate on December 4th, 2020. Yes. I'm very excited because I basically manifested this video. So even before I took the exam, I was practicing how I was going to do this video because I knew it was going to happen and I was confident in myself. So I'm going to talk a bit about my preparation process, so hopefully you can feel the same confidence as well. Number one, when there's a vague implication of substance use, assess first. So on my practice exam, there was a question about going into a client's home and seeing empty bottles. And my answer was refer him to substance use. And I got that wrong because I didn't assess first. Like with this exam, it's so important to put yourself in those situations and think about what you would do. Like if you're entering into someone's home and you see empty bottles, you can't just refer them to a substance abuse program. You have to assess the situation. The bottles may not even belong to that person. It could belong to their friend who comes over, and then next thing you know, you refer them to substance abuse and they don't even have a substance use problem. So the first thing you need to do is assess. And I'm gonna talk a bit more about that a little later in the video. Always put the client first and acknowledge feelings. Keep this in mind for family therapy as well. So on my practice exam as well, there was a question about a family coming to family therapy and the daughter said something and like it was linked to substance abuse or whatever, and my answer was okay, refer once again. But in that situation, I didn't acknowledge her feelings. Like if she is coming to me saying this and that, I can't just refer. I can't just say like, oh, you need to go to substance abuse. The first thing I need to do is acknowledge those feelings. So like I said, put yourself in those scenarios. And like always remember, acknowledge feelings first, assess first. But like I said, the acronym I'm going to give you later on in this video is going to be helpful for those questions. Next is rule out a medical issue first. If there's an implication that there is any kind of medical issue, you need to rule out that medical issue. So if one of the answers is refer to a general practitioner for an evaluation, that is most likely the answer, but you have to read the question and see if there's any kind of implication of a medical issue first. Same with substance abuse. If there's no implication of a substance abuse, don't rule out or don't refer for a substance abuse issue if there's no implication about it. So with all of these tips, you need to read the question and put yourself in that scenario and think about what you would do. If a client is coming in for an initial session and there is an option that focuses on some sort of assessment, consider it prior to focusing on the substance abuse or potential domestic violence. Like I said, assessment is one of the most important factors on this exam. So if there's anything that points to a biopsychosocial assessment, put that in the category of assessment. If a domestic violence question has two answers that are create a safety plan and refer to a shelter, consider that the shelter referral is included in a safety plan. So this was also one of my questions on my practice exam that I got wrong, and I believe I selected the option that said refer to a shelter, and the rationale said that the shelter referral would be included in the safety plan. So there's just little things that you need to consider, but all of this would be included in Therapist Development Center. I would also recommend downloading or purchasing the ASWB practice exam a few weeks before your exam, just to kind of freshen up on what the exam entails and the format, and becoming familiar with what the ASWB actual exam looks like. Recognize cultural factors in different groups, specifically Native American. So I actually had a lot of Native American related questions on my practice exam, but not necessarily on my actual exam. So I would 100% recommend just learning about Native American population. I also had a lot of questions about LGBTQ plus. Please correct me if that's the wrong terminology. I would hate to offend anyone in that group, but do your research. When you're taking the exam, you may not be familiar with every aspect of different groups, but always remember empathy, starting where the client is. You don't want to do anything to offend the population. It's always client first, client centered. Do what's best for the client and do what's going to maintain that positive client-therapist relationship. Anything that could potentially damage that relationship is most likely not the answer unless there is a safety issue involved. With group therapy, always bring individual issues between group members back to the group setting. This one's pretty straightforward. So if someone happens to come to you outside of a group therapy session complaining about someone else, always try to find a way for them to bring it back to the group and talk about the way that they're feeling. Unless there's a safety issue involved where someone is in danger or at risk, that's a completely different scenario. But for the test, I did have a few questions that mentioned me running a group and someone complaining about how someone else's words or actions made them feel. And for all of those questions, the answer choices focused on either like having an individual session with the client or bringing those issues back to the group. So I resulted those questions with bringing it back to the group somehow. Lastly is manifest yourself passing this exam. Like, you got it. Like, you're the only person who thinks you don't have it. So try to convince yourself that you have it. Literally, I wrote down my name with Lmsw almost every time after I finished studying. I purchased an Lmsw badge before I took the exam. So I went home to Florida and I took the Maryland exam, but on my board I wrote congrats on passing your Lmsw exam before I left, and I passed. So manifest yourself passing it. Tell yourself that you got it, because honestly you got it. You just have to remember little bits and pieces about how the exam is structured. And if you would like, I can make another video with a specific topic that any of you have questions on. This is kind of a broad video focused on my experience with passing the exam. So I downloaded Therapist Development Center early in the pandemic, around March of 2020. When I lost my job, I was also pursuing my master's degree at the same time. So I just thought it would be good to incorporate what I was learning in my master's degree into what I needed to study for the Lmsw exam. It was pretty expensive, but I'm also going to include some discount codes in my description, so hopefully y'all can take advantage of those discount codes, because therapist development was by far the most helpful for this exam. In addition to Therapist Development Center, I also watched a few YouTube videos. I can include their info in my description. One of them was Philip Luttrell and the other one was Pam Turner. I wasn't as effective with these YouTube videos because it was a bit difficult learning the strategies from Therapist Development Center and their strategies, but they did have bits and pieces of information that wasn't given on therapist development. So I did find it very helpful to incorporate those topics into my studying with the info from Therapist Development Center. So with Therapist Development Center, I was dedicating about 3 days a week, an hour each, to studying from March to June. And then I sort of took a break from June to August because I was just a bit overwhelmed with all the studying, and it was summer and I wanted to enjoy myself without the stress of thinking about the exam. But I actually found that really helpful because when I went back in August to start studying, I realized that I retained a lot of the information that I studied over my spring semester. So if you're pursuing your MSW exam and you're wondering where to start, I would 100% recommend downloading Therapist Development Center and incorporating those topics into what you're learning during your MSW degree. So with Therapist Development Center, you're able to extend your subscription until you pass your exam. So I 100% think that makes it worth the expense because you can literally download this on the first day of your MSW program and just study like 30 minutes a day, 2 days a week most likely, and you'll be set to take your exam before you graduate. That's not what I did, but I wish I would have done that. So if you're in the position where you're pursuing your master's degree, you're early, and you want to get ahead, 100% would recommend doing that. So in addition to Therapist Development Center and the YouTube videos, I also was really big on acronyms. As you can see, I know you're probably wondering like what these acronyms are on my wall. So the first acronym I did was for first and next questions. This came in handy on the exam. When I first sat down, I actually jotted down this acronym and the next acronym I'm going to show you, but the first one is first next questions. The F is for feelings of client and building rapport. So the first thing you should do is focus on acknowledging the client's feelings and building that rapport. The A is for assessing the situation. The R is for referring for services. E is for educating. A is for advocating. F is for facilitating. I is for intervening when it comes to a crisis situation. I'm also going to include the rationales for these acronyms in my description if you would like more details. But this acronym and the best most acronym, this acronym was very easy for me to remember because I think of aspirin is the best medication for headaches. So the A is acknowledging the client, building rapport. Like I said, for the first next acronym, this is always the first step in the situation if it doesn't already mention acknowledging the client's feelings. A is for assessing. S is for starting where the client is. P is for protecting life, determining whether they are a danger to themselves or others. If they're intoxicated, don't treat, refer. R is for rule out medical issue. I is for informed consent. N is for non-judgmental. And S is for supporting the client's determination. Like I said, I'm going to include rationales for all of these acronyms, or for both of these acronyms. The other acronyms are mine, so I don't really have like a way for you to remember them, but there is a lot of information on these two acronyms. So the next acronym, it's not really an acronym, it's more so like a sentence structure, but for the schizophrenia medication, excuse me if I pronounce these wrong, please don't judge me. But clozaril, haldol, thorazine, risperdal, Zyprexa. So for these, I was very much struggling with retaining the information for the medication, so I had to relate it to myself. So Chesera has 2 silver Rolexes. Plot twist. She does it and she's seeing things. Seeing things is a symptom of hallucinations, or seeing things is equivalent to hallucinations, and hallucinations are a symptom of schizophrenia. So this is how I remembered it. This is one example. I'm only going to do 2 of these examples, but if you would like to hear more about my acronyms for medication, drop it in the comments below and I'll do a completely separate video for that. So the next one that I did was for depressive disorders medication, which are Prozac, Celexa, Zoloft, Lexapro, Paxil, and Luvox. For this, I said pro football players sell so Lex can pass her Louvaton. And football players are often diagnosed with depression after they are injured and they can't play anymore. So that's how I remembered that. But like I said, these are the acronyms I use. I 100% would recommend that you make your own to remember medications, because honestly, like right when I saw lithium, I knew my acronym in my head, and I knew that it was for a mood disorder because of the acronym that I created. So 100% would recommend that with regard to study tips. Although I only had 2 medication questions on my exam, these were the best. And I also found Therapist Development Center really helpful because I was able to take practice exams. So this is one of my practice exams. As you can see, I didn't do too well, but I was able to take them, and they also provide rationales for like wrong answers and right answers. They tell you the rationale for every question on these practice exams. So there are 2 85 question mock exams that you're able to take twice, and they provide rationales. And then there is a final mock exam that is 170 questions. You're only able to take it once, but it's structured like the actual Lmsw exam. And there's also a lot of auditory information. There is handouts that you're able to print out. There's quizzes. So Therapist Development Center really I felt like it over prepared me, honestly. Like the questions they asked were much more bulky than the actual exam. So on the mock exam, I got a 76. And for Therapist Development Center, if you score a 70, that means you're prepared for the exam. But I really do feel like Therapist Development Center over prepares you for the exam. So if you master Therapist Development Center, that means you're 100% ready and prepared to master the actual exam. So with that in mind, I would definitely recommend it, especially if you're a master's student, because a lot of the information they give you will help you with your last semester. I know for me, I was taking psychopathology my second semester, and a lot of the information I was learning with regard to the medications was stuff that I was studying for during my Lmsw prep. So once again, I would 100% recommend Philip Luttrell on YouTube, Pam Turner on YouTube. I'm also a part of a Lmsw LCSW Facebook group. I'll include that information in my description. Therapist Development Center would 100% recommend prior to anything else, and acronyms. But once again, I would recommend figuring out what works for you. Like if you know you're not a visual or auditory learner, maybe Therapist Development Center isn't the best option for you. Maybe like the AgPAR book would be better for you, but this is what worked for me. Once again, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on your post notifications. Drop it in the comments if you pass, when you pass. If you have any specific questions. Also, shout out to my Pride Apparel for this sweater. And I'll see y'all soon.